So recently, Traxxas released the X-Maxx Ultimate, and they say it's got $1,000 worth of upgrades on it. And it really does. Now, if we check it out, this thing's got all kinds of goodies. It's got the aluminum diff housings. It has the aluminum steering system, which is really nice. The aluminum tie rods on the end, which I'm not a big fan of. We've got the aluminum center diff cap, the motor mount, the tin-coated shock shafts, and there's a lot more other stuff on here too. Now this truck costs about $400 more than the standard X-Maxx, and honestly, it's not a bad way to go. It looks phenomenal, and if you like the look, it's definitely recommended. But what about if you just took a standard X-Maxx, took that $400 difference, and then just upgraded the things that you think you need? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a $400 difference and add it to our standard X-Maxx, because there's a lot of upgrades you can use to button up and polish off the X-Maxx to just be more durable or more precise. Now, it's worth noting there's no amount of upgrades you can add to a truck to save it from abusive driving. Depending on what you do, the truck's going to break no matter what. So let's go back into the studio and let me show you some of the stuff we bought for our X-Maxx. Now the first thing we're changing out is the steering servo. We've got the servo adapter from Traxxas, a ProTech 1K TBL servo, the Hot Racing servo horn. It's in 25 tooth, made for standard size servos. And then we've got the HD spring, which is a heavy duty spring for the servo saver. That spring and this adjustable link comes included with the Traxxas 2085X servo, which you can buy, but we just bought the spring and link separately. Now, it was a little bit of work to get that servo in there. The job to install it all is pretty easy. Traxxas makes this video to walk you through the steps, but there was some custom dremeling and fitting that we had to do to get it all to fit smoothly. Now, the first thing is the wire on the servo butts right up against the wall of the adapter, so we had to put a notch in it. Then once the servo is fitted into the lower portion of the X-Maxx tray, the spline area where it's rounded out doesn't quite fit properly. It's just offset just a little bit, and then sliding the front module to the center chassis didn't go smoothly because the servo in the horn is just a little bulky, so we just notched the edges of the servo adapter slightly. Now once you get all that done though, it fits, no problem. The next issue we had though is that the servo horn does not fit into the bearing supported servo horn area on the front module. So we just took that horn off and put this clamping straight horn on there. This is the standard length, and then you use the first hole. The steering overall, though, is much improved, and there's a lot of power coming out of this servo, and I'm not worried about the servo horn not being supported. It shouldn't be an issue with this servo. The servo saver is still taking up some of the energy from the servo, though, but that's just doing its job, and we'll see how well it holds up, and then we may change out the steering linkage to the aluminum set from Hot Racing with that adjustable servo saver. Now next, we wanted to beef up some of the suspension a little, so we've got the RPM front axle carriers, and these include a bearing. They say they include an oversized bearing, but it's actually the same size that comes on the X-Maxx now currently. These carriers though, they're just a little bit more beefed up over the stock units. Buying the XRT front carriers are also an improvement over the X-Maxx carriers if you want to go that route. And in installing these carriers, they were actually just a little tight fitting them onto the front hub, and we had to sand them down slightly to get them to fit smoothly without any binding. We also picked up the rear RPM hubs that again come with what they say are oversized bearings, but they're the same size bearings that come with the X-Maxx currently. If you want to use these included bearings, RPM says on this little sheet that you need to pop up one of the shields and then lube the bearings yourself because they're not properly lubed, and you can do that pretty easily with an X-Acto knife. Now installing the rear hubs was super smooth, there's no binding, it's a really good fit. Now next are these Hot Racing captured hinge pins, and these are a great upgrade for durability and are a big improvement using a nut on the end over the stock X-Maxx system with the little screw that captures the hinge pin. This type of system is also how racing kits are made to be heavy duty and last the long haul, and you can use this exact package of hinge pins on all the outer suspension spots on the X-Maxx, although you will need a 4mm drill bit to to pop out one side of the suspension arm so that hinge pin can slide all the way through and you can put the nut on the end. We put the hinge pins on the top and the bottom outer locations on the rear hubs, but then we only put them on the lower position on the front. You can put them on the upper position on the front, but it's so tight the way the knuckle turns with your steering travel, adding one to the top will limit the travel just a little bit. Next are these RPM shock guards. These are just heavy-duty plastic guards to cover up your shock shafts to help prevent dirt buildup on them. And they use their own spring cup at the bottom that screws on to the shock, and then the guard screws on to that spring cup. So they're really strong, they're really rigid, they do not rub on the spring, and we picked them up in orange to match the orange body, and I think they just look really cool. So that's partly why we got them, but also to protect the shocks because the shock shafts do tend to collect a lot of dirt. Another item that's really simple and basic and not really exciting at all are these Kyosho washers. One of the issues that we've had with the X-Maxx is the screw pulling through the shock towers. So there's a big heavy duty screw going in the middle. If you back that out and add one of these larger washers, it'll just help prevent the screw from pulling through the shock tower under heavy hits. The front shock tower gets a washer and the rear shock tower gets a washer also, and that should just help prevent that issue from happening again. Now the next item we're adding is strictly just for the bling bling because they look cool, and it's these orange countersunk washers. And we're gonna put these over the remaining spots where a screw captures the hinge pin. The stock screws aren't really a problem, but now we're just extra covered and we've got that orange look, which is pretty dang nice. So the truck is done, and this thing was a labor of love. The servo was the most expensive thing we added, with a total expense of about $308. Now with that money left over, some things that I'd really like to add would be the sledgehammer tires to the truck, although all the current X-Maxxes already include these as standard. The aluminum steering system would also go great with that high-powered servo. A steel spur gear would also be another great item, but I think we'll wait for ours to break first, so let's just go drive it. This is super chunky. Only large-scale cars could handle this terrain. Unfortunately, our tire just ripped off the bead, so we still have about $100 left. Maybe we should use that to go upgrade our tires. Oh, okay. It smells like traction. Well, the truck is really dirty now. It's gonna need a bath, but it did really well out there. The X-Maxx is so big, it just tromps through the chunkiest, gnarliest terrain imaginable. It just doesn't care. As for the upgrades we put on, most of the upgrades you can't feel a difference when you drive it, except for that servo. It is so strong, and its strength was definitely felt, in part thanks to that stiffer servo saver spring, which is really needed. The tires too, the sledgehammer tires perform really good in the loose and loamy, and the truck pops wheelies no problem. And then the shock guards also did a good job at shielding the shocks, with the rear guards taking most of the abuse. Now, did we do a better job than just buying an X-Maxx Ultimate? I don't know. That truck, you can just buy it, immediately start driving, where this truck, personalizing it, was a labor of love and took time, but it was a cheaper route to go. In the end, I'm happier with this truck, and this is definitely the way that I would choose to go, but not everybody's going to agree with that. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video upgrading the X-Maxx. If you want to go check out any of the parts that we used, check out our links down below. And if you want more RC videos, check these out.